When the question wasn't, how many tanks can we build, but how can we kill one that nothing can stop, military academies rarely teach what happened. Western analysts in the Cold War dismissed it as a footnote, a transition weapon, a design anomaly. But hidden in the classified archives of NATO was a line from a U.S. intelligence summary on Soviet self-propelled artillery. The ISU-122 represents an early Soviet attempt at overmatch philosophy, not through innovation, but by permitting ideas outside command hierarchy to take form. In other words, sometimes, the best weapon is the one no one ordered. And what of the boy Nikolai Mikhailovich Zaitsev? Never became a general, never ran a design bureau. After the war, he became a civil engineer, working on bridges in Orenburg. He lived a quiet life. His name never appeared in textbooks, no medals, no documentaries, only a footnote in a classified appendix under unofficial concept origins. But those who knew the engineers, the officers, the gunners they remembered, because once, when the war was being lost to a monster of German steel, it wasn't a general or a hero who saved them. It was a 15-year-old with a pencil and a question no one else thought to ask. How do you kill the tiger before it even roars? The air over Kursk was thick with smoke, the scent of scorched oil and burned rubber settling over the steppe like a curse. In July 1943, the greatest tank battle in human history had begun, and Soviet armor was dying by the battalion. T-34s, the pride of Soviet engineering, erupted into fireballs under the wrath of Germany's newest beast, the Tiger I. Its 80mm KWK-36 cannon was rewriting the laws of tank warfare, punching through Soviet hulls at ranges no Red Army tanker had ever trained for. Entire armored regiments were vanishing before getting within firing distance. The reports from the front were chilling. Penetrated at 1/800 meters, direct hit, no effect. Return fire failed. Gun destroyed before it could traverse. In Moscow, a war room buried beneath layers of granite echoed with the clatter of slide rules and panic. Generals barked for answers. Designers proposed patches thicker steel, angled glacis, heavier turrets. None of it could be manufactured fast enough, and none of it could guarantee a tiger kill. And then an envelope arrived. It came through a junior clerk at the Ministry of Armaments. No stamp, no insignia, just a handwritten return address from Ufa, Bashkiria. Inside 3 pages of notes, 2 ink-stained sketches, and a cover letter in youthful Cyrillic to Comrade Stalin. I have an idea for killing the Tiger tank. Please show this to someone who can test it. The author, Nikolai Mikhailovich Zaitsev, age 15. At first, the engineers laughed. A child suggesting battlefield solutions. But then Colonel Viktor Kornev, a veteran artilleryman with half a face left from Finland, leaned in and frowned. Wait, he muttered. That's a naval recoil bracket. Who taught him this geometry? They gathered closer. The boy's design wasn't elegant, but it was bold. Mount a modified 122mm naval gun on a low-profile chassis. Reinforce the breech. Limit elevation. Fire from hull-down positions. Use trajectory physics to penetrate the Tiger's frontal plate by exploiting a calculated strike angle at over 800 meters. It was suicide. It was madness. And it might just work. Within 48 hours. The sketch was on a test range. Not a word spoken to the press. Not a single officer wanted credit yet. And when the shell fired, when the Tiger target was hit square in the front glacis, and the round passed through the driver's seat and out the rear plate, no one laughed. Not anymore. In the months before Kursk, the Red Army's high command lived in a world of confident delusion. The Tiger was terrifying. Yes, but in theory, it could be beaten. Soviet planners believed their answer lay in mass. Where the Germans had precision, the USSR would bring volume, dozens of T-34s for every Tiger. If one got through, that was enough. And yet, it wasn't. When Tiger battalions rolled forward, they did so with impunity. T-34s that dared engage head-on were destroyed at distances more suited for artillery duels. Soviet gunners fired, and the rounds simply bounced off the Tiger's 100-millimeter frontal armor like pebbles on a steel door. Still, command clung to the wrong assumptions. First, that the answer to armor was more armor. Second, that all tank warfare would occur under 500 meters. Third, that any deviation from established design would cripple production. Design bureaus were instructed to iterate, not innovate. New models of the KV series tanks were proposed with heavier plating, bigger turrets, and broader tracks. But the field reports told a grim story. Engines overheated, gearboxes shattered under the new weight, logistics collapsed. Even worse, no configuration of 76mm or 85mm guns could reliably pierce a Tiger from the front at anything beyond suicidal range. That didn't stop ideas from pouring in, most of them lunacy. Suicide squads with magnetic mines, armored tractors hauling bundles of TNT, biplane dive bombers kamikazing into tank formations, inside the Ministry of Armaments. A quiet war was being fought, not against the Germans, but against imagination itself. Engineers feared suggesting anything too radical. Proposals too far from doctrine were shelved without review. That's why, when the envelope arrived bearing a 15-year-old sketch, it was passed hand to hand as a joke. This boy wants to mount a naval cannon on a tank. One officer chuckled. Does he think we're building battleships now? Look at this. He's suggesting bracing the recoil with a fixed cradle. That would tear the turret off. But Colonel Korneve didn't laugh. He'd seen what those naval guns did to German bunkers in Sevastopol. And he knew something the others didn't. Physics didn't care about age. A calculated strike from a high-velocity round, if fired at the right angle, could defeat even the Tiger's frontal plate. He brought the sketch to a young artillery engineer. Run the numbers, he ordered. An hour later, the engineer returned, pale. If this thing fires without tearing itself apart, it will punch through a Tiger like cardboard. The laughter stopped, and the boy's sketch was quietly placed on the prototype schedule. Soviet anti-tank doctrine, forged in the fires of early World War II, was built on 3 pillars: mobility, numbers, and proximity. The T-34 had been revolutionary, a medium tank with sloped armor, wide tracks, and a 76.2mm gun that could rip through panzers at 300 meters. Soviet planners had grown accustomed to this advantage. They assumed the same formula would scale. It didn't. And the Tiger, I changed everything. Its frontal armor was impervious to all but the heaviest shells, and those could only be mounted on slow, vulnerable chassis. Its 88mm cannon reached out beyond 2 kilometers with deadly accuracy. Suddenly, Soviet tanks weren't predators. They were prey. Still, command clung to the old beliefs. Engage at close range, flank the enemy, overwhelm with speed and numbers. But close range was suicide, and flanking a Tiger required surviving long enough to get there. What the boy's sketch proposed was blasphemy to Soviet orthodoxy. A low-slung, fixed-gun vehicle. No turret, no maneuver kill. Just one shot from long range with the raw kinetic energy to kill anything on the field. He'd drawn a rudimentary hull, low profile, easy to conceal with a 122mm naval cannon welded to a reinforced superstructure. At first glance, it looked like madness, But a deeper read showed something else, doctrinal subversion. This wasn't a tank. It was a tank destroyer with a very specific mission: eliminate Tigers from standoff range before they could fire. No dogfights, no heroics, just math, steel, and velocity. And most damning of all, it implied that Soviet doctrine was wrong. If a 15-year-old could conceive a weapon outside the Red Army's playbook, what did that say about the generals who'd lost 500,000 men trying to outflank the Tiger engineers whispered, "Isn't this just a mobile artillery piece?" "No," said Colonel Corneef. "It's a scalpel, built to cut the beast's throat." There was precedent. The Germans themselves had fielded the Ferdinand and Nashorn anti-tank guns on tracks, trading flexibility for firepower. But the Soviets had never embraced the idea. Their doctrine demanded multi-role platforms, a turret, mobility, tactical flexibility. The sketch defied all of that. It bet everything on one clean kill, and in doing so, it forced Soviet minds to confront a truth they didn't want to face: if their doctrine couldn't kill the Tiger. Maybe it was time to build something that could. The test range at Kubinka was silent, save for the crows and the hum of tension. Engineers had welded together a Frankenstein prototype, a gutted KV chassis, a reinforced gun cradle, and, perched like a cannon on a cliff, the monstrous 120mm A-19 naval gun. It looked crude, improvised, barely functional, but it was real, and today it would be fired. The target, a captured Tiger Hull, its armor intact, its soul long departed. No one expected it to work. The recoil alone, some whispered, would shatter the mount. Others feared the chassis would buckle, the barrel shear, the loader killed by overpressure. No tank had ever fired a shell this heavy with this much propellant from such a platform. But Colonel Corneef wasn't interested in caution. He stood beside the firing officer, glanced at the crude sights, and nodded. Fire. A thunderclap split the air. The shockwave knocked loose a panel on a nearby observation tower. Dust cascaded from every structure. Even the birds scattered like shrapnel. And downrange, 800 meters away, the Tiger's hull quaked. The shell didn't just strike the upper glacis. It penetrated. It traveled through the driver's position. It exited the rear armor plate, leaving a jagged hole the size of a man's head. The range went silent. No one moved. No one cheered. The impossible had happened, and it had done so not with a prototype from a bureau, not from an academy-trained officer, but from a crude design scribbled in ink by a boy too young to shave. Engineers crowded the breach. The gun hadn't cracked. The chassis, though bruised, was intact. The recoil system modeled after the naval sketches the boy had seen in a 1930s mechanics magazine had absorbed the force. "Run it again," Corneef said. A second shot, a new hull. Same result. By the third test, disbelief turned to reverence. One gun, one hit, one Tiger dead. Every time. The boy's sketch was no longer a curiosity. It was a proof of concept, and the conversations that followed were whispered with urgency. Could this be standardized? Could it be lightened? Could the recoil be tamed further? Could it be built? Now, what began as a joke in a ministry hallway had become a secret project. The Soviet Union, for the first time, had something it never thought it needed: a tank killer with only one purpose: to erase the myth of German invincibility. The reports from Kubinka reached Moscow like thunder on a clear day. 3 shots, 3 penetrations, a captured Tiger, I reduced to wreckage by a gun no tank was supposed to carry. But in the corridors of the State Committee for Defense Technology, the mood was not triumph, it was denial. The initial test results were dismissed as anomalous. Senior officials insisted the armor on the Tiger target must have been degraded. Wartime stress fractures. One officer scoffed. Field damage, said another. The data, too precise, too clean, was labeled an outlier. The problem wasn't technical, it was psychological. The idea that a child, an untrained, unsanctioned outsider, had done what the finest minds of the Soviet Union had failed to do was politically unbearable. To admit the gun worked meant admitting the system had failed. In closed-door sessions, senior officers accused Colonel Korneev of showmanship, of planning a stunt to embarrass rival design bureaus. Some claimed the test gun was a prototype meant for coastal defense, never intended for mobile use. Others argued the recoil was exaggerated to intimidate. But then something strange happened. A second test was conducted, this time unannounced, observed only by a hand-picked team from the GAB-TU Maine Armored Directorate. Different gun, different Tiger hull, different crew, and yet again one shot, one kill, full penetration, rear armor exit. Still, the disbelief held. "It's not battlefield viable," said a tank battalion commander. "No turret, poor mobility, limited traverse. The crew would be vulnerable. The gun can't sustain rate of fire." And all of it was true within the framework of existing doctrine. But that was the flaw. The weapon wasn't meant to fit into doctrine. It was meant to destroy the enemy that doctrine couldn't touch in desperation. Korneev bypassed the traditional approval chain and submitted the test footage directly to the Artillery Directorate. He attached the original sketches now kept in a sealed folder and the recorded penetrations. The footage was grainy, but the moment of impact was clear. So was the result. A single phrase was scrawled across the bottom of the report, "Viable," with tactical restrictions. "Recommend rapid prototyping." Suddenly, the momentum shifted. The Ministry of Armaments authorized a design cell small, classified, and temporary to build a working prototype based on the test rig. A chassis was selected, gun mount calculations adjusted, ammunition logistics reviewed. The project had a name, now ISU 122, and Moscow, for all its arrogance, had no choice but to follow the math, because something terrifying had become clear. The impossible idea had survived contact with reality. Even as the ISU 122 program advanced, the old guard refused to surrender. Inside the Kremlin's war rooms and research bureaus, competing designs continued to flow, most centered around the prevailing theory that only bigger tanks, with thicker armor and massive turrets, could stand toe-to-toe with the Tiger. The favorite child of this belief system was the IS-2, a monstrous 46-ton breakthrough tank armed with the same 122 D-25T gun, but built around the classic Soviet idea of mobile fortress warfare. It was a symbol of defiance, proof that the Soviet Union could match German engineering blow for blow. But the IS-2 had limits. Its turret traverse was slow. Its armor was formidable. Yes, but it came at the cost of speed and mechanical reliability. In field tests, the IS-2 could outgun the Tiger, but not outrun it, and not outmaneuver it. It wasn't a hunter. It was a bludgeon. This was the flaw at the heart of the wrong theory symmetry. Soviet planners wanted parity. If the Germans built a tank that could kill at 2 kilometers, the USSR would build one that could do the same but better. The result was heavy tanks that mirrored the enemy's logic, rather than subverting it. And yet, in a quiet testing ground in Nizhny Tagil, the ISU 122 was doing just that. Lacking a turret, it didn't pretend to be flexible. With a crew of 4, it didn't pretend to be survivable. It was a scalpel surgical, fragile, lethal. Worse still, for the traditionalists, was where the ISU 122 came from. Not from a design bureau. Not from a battle-hardened veteran. but from a sketch by a boy whose only qualification was curiosity and clarity. The doctrinal divide widened. IS-2 proponents argued it was the future of Soviet armor, a symbol of industrial might. It could smash defenses, survive return fire, and command respect. "You cannot win a war," one senior officer growled, with toys designed on school desks. But in the field, things looked different. ISU 122 gunners began field trials against captured German armor. Their kill ratio was astronomical: 1 shot, 1 vehicle, concealed in tree lines, set in ambush. These improvised guns became silent assassins. They didn't seek glory. They didn't need to. The battlefield no longer cared for doctrine. It cared for results. And as one artillery commander dryly noted, after watching an ISU 122 punch through a tiger at 1/200 meters, call it a toy if you like, it just killed your theory. When the ISU 122's kill records began to circulate, a new camp emerged, one not rooted in armor at all. The second wrong theory came from above, literally. Aerial warfare advocates within the Soviet air forces proposed that the Tiger problem wasn't a tank problem, it was a targeting problem. Instead of building new ground vehicles, why not neutralize German armor with airstrikes? The Il-2 Sturmovik, nicknamed the Flying Tank, was already bombing columns across the Eastern Front. With new rocket pods and armor-piercing bombs, it could, they argued, destroy Tigers from above without risking precious ground crews. The theory looked good on paper and in propaganda. But the skies told another story. IL-2 squadrons took catastrophic losses when German flak concentrations were dense. Their rockets unguided, imprecise, rarely achieved a direct hit. Against lighter armor, shock and fragmentation did the job, but against the Tiger, pilots had to get dangerously low and dead on to even scratch the surface. Most didn't come back. Still, the theory persisted. At Stalingrad, at Kharkov, at the Dnieper crossings, air commanders insisted on mass rocket salvos against entrenched German armor. And yet, after each sortie, the Tigers were still there, intact, operational. It wasn't until the ISU 122 was deployed into urban ruins that the comparison became lethal. In the shattered outskirts of Vitebsk, Soviet infantry were pinned by a lone Tiger commanding an intersection. Artillery couldn't reach it. Air support was grounded by weather. For 48 hours, the beast controlled the block like a medieval siege engine. Then an ISU 122 rolled in, hidden behind the rubble of a collapsed post office. The crew sighted the Tiger from 800 meters, adjusted for trajectory, and fired. 1 shot, and the Tiger's turret split from its hull like a broken jaw. It didn't burn. It didn't explode. It ceased. No strafing runs, no rockets, no loss of life. Just cold calculation and one decisive hit. The air war theorists had to admit the math: 10 sorties for 1 kill versus 1 shot for 1 tank. And in a war of logistics, that kind of efficiency wasn't optional. It was survival. The battlefield had no patience left for romanticism. Aircraft could soften, bombs could scatter. But if you needed a Tiger gone, you sent the gun that a teenager had drawn. While the Red Army quietly field-tested its new weapon, German intelligence watched and misread everything. Intercepted communications revealed a new Soviet vehicle, something armed with a heavy gun, turretless, and slow. Luftwaffe recon snapped blurry photos of low-profile hulls with oversized barrels. Analysts dismissed them as self-propelled artillery, useful only for infantry support. No threat to armor. One Abwehr report concluded: immobile, vulnerable, poor visibility. They called it a waste of resources. And that was their first mistake. German field commanders began to whisper reports from the front. Tigers taken out from unexpected angles. No survivors, no warning, no return fire. At first, these were dismissed as exaggerated claims from panicked infantry. Probably mines, headquarters said, close-range ambushes. But there were no mine craters, no burn patterns, just perfect penetrations frontal, upper glacis, clean exits through the rear, damage only explainable by one thing: direct hits from a weapon as powerful as their own 88 mimics. Still, disbelief held. In January 1944, an intact Tiger was found destroyed near Zloben. No apparent engagement, no aircraft overhead, and no flank access. German technicians examined the kill. The armor was pierced straight through. The angle suggested a gun mounted low, but with terrifying muzzle energy. They still had no name for the vehicle that fired it. That was their second mistake. They didn't understand the logic of the ISU-122 because it wasn't built on logic they recognized. German doctrine valued the kill chain, reconnaissance, maneuver, firepower. Soviet designers had bypassed the chain entirely. The ISU-122 didn't need to maneuver. It didn't chase targets. It sat, it waited, it annihilated. German tank crews learned the hard way. At Narva, a Tiger platoon rolled into what appeared to be an unoccupied sector. The first tank exploded from a hidden position. The second reversed straight into a ravine. The third fired blindly and caught nothing but echo. All three were gone in minutes. Only afterward did the Germans find the firing site. An ISU-122 dug into the embankment, still warm, still loaded, still watching. By the time Berlin's command circles realized the ISU-122 wasn't an outlier, but a mass-produced tank killer, the damage was done. Production had ramped, units had trained, doctrine had shifted. They called it the ghost gun. Not because it was invisible, but because by the time they saw it, they were already dead. The ISU-122 was not an accident. It wasn't a battlefield improvisation or a fluke born of desperation. It was, in the end, the purest expression of the Soviet war machine, brutal, efficient, and born from the collision between necessity and ideology. What began as a 15-year-old sketch became a cornerstone of Red Army doctrine. The State Defense Committee moved fast. They stripped down the production lines of Chelyabinsk's Kirov plant, repurposing IS tank hulls for self-propelled gun platforms. The 122 mm A-19, originally a towed corps-level artillery piece, was retooled for vehicle mount. Recoil systems were redesigned using naval dampening principles, loading drills were rewritten, firing protocols revised. And then, the flood began. By 1944, hundreds of ISU-122s were rolling off the lines every month. Crews were trained not as tankers, but as executioners. They weren't taught to maneuver or engage in prolonged fights. They were taught to calculate range, estimate armor thickness, adjust elevation, fire once, and move on. The Soviets knew they couldn't match German optics, or radio discipline, or combined arms finesse, so they built a system that didn't require any of it. The ISU-122 doctrine was built around three words: ambush, concealment, kill. When deployed properly, ISU-122 struck from forests, from rubble, from the shadow of collapsed infrastructure. Infantry reported their positions only after confirming Tiger sightings. These guns didn't fight for territory. They hunted for reputation. Each kill was a message: your supremacy ends here, behind the guns. A quiet revolution took place. Artillery officers began rotating into tank destroyer units, bringing with them a new language of combat, one not based on mobility, but geometry. Gunnery schools stopped teaching range guessing and started teaching armor vectors. Recruits were drilled on engine compartment positioning, lower glacis vulnerabilities, and turret ring stress points, and above all, on patience. The Red Army had learned the hard way that fighting the tiger on its own terms was suicide, so they didn't. They built a doctrine that ignored German strengths entirely. The ISU-122 didn't care how thick your armor was. It didn't care about your kill-to-loss ratio. It just asked one question. Are you within 1/200 meters? If the answer was yes, your fate was sealed. And then there was the ghost behind it all, forgotten by most, remembered by few. Nikolai Mikhailovich Zaitsev, now just 16, had been quietly relocated to a design school in Moscow. He never saw the battlefield, never witnessed the kills. But his sketch the boy's math, the boy's angles had been etched into Soviet steel. And in that steel, the Red Army finally had a weapon that erased fear with certainty. One shot, one kill. Every time. It came in June 1944. Operation Bagration, Stalin's hammer blow to the Wehrmacht's Eastern Front. The Red Army unleashed over 2 million men, 6,000 tanks, and thousands of artillery pieces in a coordinated assault designed to erase Army Group Center from existence. But buried within the armored waves were formations the Germans didn't expect. Silent, angular, turretless. ISU-122s rolled forward not with the spearheads but behind them, lying in wait for Germany's counterstroke. And the Tigers came, as expected, outside the city of Orsha. The German 505th Heavy Panzer Battalion launched a textbook counterattack. 20 Tiger Is and Elephants pushed toward a Soviet salient, confident in their ability to punch through and roll the flank. They advanced in formation, guns primed, confident. But the Soviets were already watching. ISU-122s had been placed in hull-down positions across a 2-kilometer frontage, camouflaged, pre-ranged, and waiting for angles. Each crew had rehearsed this scenario. Tigers on the move, frontal approach, slow terrain. The battlefield had become a shooting gallery. The first Tiger was hit at 1/300 meters. The shell entered the driver's vision port and detonated the ammunition rack. Instant kill. The second was hit mid-turn. The round pierced the lower glasses and snapped the drive shaft. Immobilized, burning. The third never knew what hit it, just a blast through the turret ring and silence. Within 40 minutes, 13 Tigers were gone. The rest withdrew in confusion. Radio traffic captured by Soviet signals units revealed disbelief, even panic. We are being hit from unseen guns, armor not holding. We cannot engage. German commanders blamed aircraft at first and then mines. Only after the battle, when charred Tiger wrecks were examined, did the truth become undeniable. The ISU-122 had done in minutes what Soviet infantry couldn't do in months, and the humiliation was absolute. Tiger crews had been elite handpicked, battle-hardened, and fed propaganda about their invincibility. Now, they were being stalked by weapons they couldn't even see. For every ISU-122 lost, 5 Tigers burned. The kill ratio flipped. The mythology shattered. Back in Berlin, Hitler fumed. Reports were altered. Excuses written. New orders given to up-armor the Tigers' flanks and introduce countermeasures. But it was too late. The battlefield had changed. One Soviet unit scrawled a phrase on the barrel of their ISU-122 Zaitsev's razor. It became a whispered legend in the ranks about the boy who had taught them how to kill giants. In every engagement that followed Kaunas, Vilnius, Minsk, the story repeated. Tigers rolled in, and one by one, they never came back. The Tiger tank was never just a weapon, it was a psychological instrument. It embodied Nazi Germany's belief in technological supremacy, in battlefield dominance through fear, wherever it appeared. Soviet morale faltered, infantry scattered, tank crews hesitated. Artillery observers redirected fire. But in the summer of 1944, that fear began to evaporate. Not through massed victory, not through numerical advantage, but through precision destruction. The ISU-122 was never celebrated in parades. It wasn't beautiful. It didn't look like victory, but it functioned like it. Its effect on German strategy was profound. Entire armored battalions were forced to reroute their advances to avoid terrain suspected of harboring ISU units. German scouts were tasked not just with tracking troop movements, but with spotting that distinctive, low-slung silhouette. The Nazi command structure began losing confidence in its most iconic weapon. When Tigers became liabilities expensive, slow-moving targets drawing fire from unseen killers, the psychological edge shifted. Soviet commanders took note. Operations began incorporating ISU-122 kill teams as forward hunters. Instead of acting reactively, they dictated the battlefield, not with speed, not with numbers, but with presence. And the collapse wasn't only tactical. The very foundations of German armored doctrine based on invincibility, on the overmatch principle, were eroded. The myth of the supertank was gone, and with it, the arrogance that had blinded Hitler's generals. One after-action report from a German logistics officer painted the new reality in brutal detail. We no longer speak of Tiger Shock. We now speak of the razor. It strikes once. We do not see it. We do not know from where. We only bury the wreck. The ideological collapse echoed inside the Wehrmacht's elite panzer divisions. Their flagship weapon was no longer feared. It was hunted. And as the Red Army advanced westward, the ISU-122 advanced with it not at the front, but in the shadows. A weapon that turned the battlefield into a ledger. One shell, one kill, one more tiger erased from memory. The Soviet Union had done something the Germans never imagined possible. They had turned a crude, awkward, mathematically improbable sketch into a doctrine destroying reality. And the cost of that miscalculation was written in steel and smoke. Years passed. The war ended. The Soviet Union rose from ashes into superpower status. The ISU-122 was retired, its chassis obsolete by Cold War standards, its gun outclassed by newer calibers, stabilized platforms, laser sights, but its ghost never left. In the war museums of Minsk, Moscow, and Kursk, the ISU-122 sits quietly, never the centerpiece, rarely given the credit it earned. Visitors pass by, drawn to the flashier silhouettes of the T-34, the brute power of the IS-2, or the vast wingspans of MiG fighters. But the veterans, those who served, who fought, pause at the 122 because they remember. They remember the day when doctrine failed and the sketch succeeded.